Hey, it's Soul with another video brought to you by Boners. Boners Mineral Water, it's really just salty tears. Faction Conflict. It's the cornerstone of the Warcraft franchise itself. All you gotta do is say Horde versus Alliance. It's a phrase that instantly makes a deep connection to fans, especially those who have played the World of Warcraft because they became a part of that story when making that first character and had to choose one side or the other. Friends and families were either strengthened or broken apart from that faction divide. I meant to say that in a fun way, but I'm sure there are numerous stories of how friends have been separated because one friend wanted to play as the Horde, while the other one wanted to, stare at this all day. You know what I mean. The faction conflict has been a double-edged sword for the World of Warcraft because Blizzard has had to write a story that respects the forever back and forth between the Horde and Alliance. They've had to be incredibly conservative to avoid or dull the impacts where players felt bad. I mean, for example, who likes losing? Whether it's a capital city or a famed hero for their faction. In all fairness, Blizzard does loosely adopt a policy of, well, shouldn't both factions suffer equally? Or is that too a wasted effort that gives the conflict less consequence and meaning? Meanwhile, railing against this, there's this unsurprisingly vocal part of the World of Warcraft community opposed to being part of the faction war at all, regardless of whether their side ends up winning or losing. Not everyone wants to be the hired butcher for a dear leader, and I get that. So Blizzard has made strides to respect that too, often reserving the more extreme acts of the Horde or Alliance to happen outside of our hands, in a cutscene or a novel, or, well, maybe there's no scene at all, it just happens. And a bit of narrative gymnastics goes on to communicate to our champions that it is not us committing these terrible atrocities, it's the scapegoats of the day. We just happen to be loosely associated with them, that's all. And yet, the interactions outside of the game, on the battlegrounds of social media, we observe this growing polarization. Us versus them, good versus evil, black versus white versus hashtag morally gray. Some of us don't have a problem with this at all. Not because we're more enlightened than our counterparts, but maybe because Warcraft is just a story written by someone else that we are simply watching from within. Maybe because WoW is a game we don't connect as intimately as others do. But for those of us who have been looking for a change, a few possible solutions have come up. Ending the faction war is one. Have someone finally win so we can move on to something else already. Or to unite the factions so our friends and family can finally play together again. After all, in the World of Warcraft there's always been some big bad that the Horde and Alliance have to lay down their arms and come together and fight, or some neutral faction brings us champions together because our factions had a boo-boo. It reminds us that the faction war is artificial. We're forced apart, unlike more sandboxy games where the social structures are indeed impactful and real. Today, after this lengthy intro, I'm going to explore one solution. I don't know if this has been brought up already, but since I haven't seen it around, it's mine. It's all mine. Just put my name on it. Anyway, this is just an incomplete concept. I don't have the answers to every question that challenges this idea. I can't tell you how to solve every issue that this change will cause, but I'll give a few examples of what is possible. This, as always, is for fun, and to get you to think, what if the World of Warcraft can be enjoyed a little bit differently? Alright, so here are the main bullet points. 1. The faction war, it's not gonna end. The Horde and Alliance can duke it out until Blizzard gets blue in the face, or bluer. So Warcraft gets to keep its cornerstone. 2. Players will no longer be divided by their Horde and Alliance affiliations, at least mostly. The bottom line is that every race, regardless of faction, will be able to group and play together. So your nightmare scenarios of entirely elf teams can indeed come true. 3, and this is more like a consequence of the first 2 points, there will in fact be a third faction. Looking at these bullet points almost seems like a contradiction. How do you still have the Horde and Alliance still at each other's throats while we, the champions, can all play with each other, and who is this third faction? So strap in, folks, and be prepared to get both blown away and maybe incredibly offended by what I'm proposing. I have to warn you now that to proceed further, you'll want to throw all of your preconceptions of the World of Warcraft and the faction conflict totally out the window. You ready? Yeah? Okay? Alright, let's do it. Actually, I think I'm going to give an example first, and then I'll describe what's going on. Let's start with looking at the beginning of the Mists of Pandaria expansion. We recall that at the beginning of MoP, players are summoned to their faction leader's house to get debriefed, and then we're whisked off to Pandaria. We're thrown into a fierce battle between Horde and Alliance gunships. We mess each other up, and shadowy ghost monsters appear, more things blow up, and then we, the champions, move on to help ruin the Jade Forest because, for the Horde, for the Alliance, whatever. So let's change how that approach works if all playable races were part of just one faction. It's the first day of the expansion. A bulletin board is put up in various parts of the world, or, well, everyone just gets a quest.
The Horde and Alliance have discovered a new continent. See Pandaria, the land hidden in the mists. Full of mystery, adventure, and loot, come adventurers and make your mark on the world.
We, who are not labeled as champions of the Horde or Alliance, but merely seasoned adventurers, answer the call, hop onto the first boat that we can see, and make way. Unfortunately, the closest place we can weigh anchor is remarkably close to a certain battle between the Horde and Alliance. Great. We touch ground and two paths lay before us. One path leads to a nearby village that we can check out and meet the mysterious and fluffy Pandaren. This is what I'm going to call the adventure quest line. Quests that are shared among all the races, separated from any faction conflict, with a focus on discovery, exploration, or other violence and shenanigans. Going down the other path leads to the battlefield. For now, let's stick to familiar World of Warcraft territory and go to the fighting. I'm a Blood Elf and Blood Elves are a part of the Horde. I can't change my predisposition. So I talk to General Nazgrim and offer my assistance for, gold. When I accept this offer, I now participate in a faction quest, one that is exclusive for the faction that my race is a part of. I fight for the Horde, and for now, I represent their interests. I can't just sign up with the Alliance as a merc because they'd probably shoot me on sight unless, I called myself a high elf, but that gets complicated. Anyway, the battle plays out as it normally does, with fighting, explosions, and Sha. As each quest is completed, I'm offered one faction quest after another to play out this faction storyline. But I'm losing interest in this. I'm gonna go back to this village and see what's up. So I abandon the faction quest. My temporary alignment to the Horde is severed, and I go back to this village to meet the Pandaren and help people out. This sort of concept sounds kind of weird. It's sort of different, it's sort of the same, so now let's jump into what's going on here. In this concept, going forward in the World of Warcraft, the idea of choosing a faction is no longer a thing. You're no longer referred to as a champion of the Horde or the Alliance, simply an adventurer. All races will now be able to group together, raid together, and understand each other's languages. When choosing a race, your race will still determine whether you're a Horde or Alliance character, but this choice won't have the same extreme restrictions as before. There will still be plenty of quests and dungeons and raids to complete like you normally do. But a new kind of quest type will be introduced, a faction quest. These can come as traditional quests or world quest objectives. Picking up these quests means that you, as an adventurer, are now working for your faction, at least temporarily for mutual gain. That means that during that time, if you happen to be grouped with someone from the opposite faction, you're unable to receive credit for these faction quests, much like how being in a raid group makes you ineligible to get quest credit at all. It also doesn't make you hostile to races from the opposite faction. That's a PvP thing, and I'll touch on that later. Those are the fundamental changes that'll happen with this single faction adventurer concept. You're a wanderer, a seeker of thrills and fame and gold. When it suits you, or if you just like completing every quest under the sun, you can execute the will of your faction's agenda for more thrills and fame and gold, until you don't want to anymore. There are many things that will not change. There's still capital cities and areas that are faction specific. The Horde and Alliance are still at odds, but you're not quite a part of it either. Battlegrounds and arenas will still feel the same. Instead, it'll just be as if mercenary mode was a permanent thing. But obviously there are things that will change, and I'll just talk about one example. And that's open PvP, or War Mode, which is a little bit hard to talk about right now because War Mode in the upcoming Battle for Azeroth expansion isn't even out yet. But imagine this concept. Instead of flagging yourself for PvP in your faction's capital city, there will be 3 toggles. So you'll be able to set your War Mode to either off, faction, or open. Faction means you'll be hostile only to the opposite faction. Open, well, that means you're hostile to everyone who isn't in your party or raid. I think this can be a really cool way of rewriting the World of Warcraft in such a way that the story is still preserved, but players can now be as involved or uninvolved in some of the events that play out. there's been this persistent critique about WoW, and I agree with this, that WoW as a story is just a train that we ride on. No matter what happens, we become a commander of a garrison, a leader of our class order, a living weapon of the Horde or the Alliance. This approach takes us just a few degrees away from those stations. We're no less capable of amazing feats and accomplishments, but we don't have to be thrust into these roles every time either. The bigger draw obviously is that players can now be brought together. The line that once separated us has shattered. However, the rivalry and the conflict that defines Warcraft is still as loud and proud as it's ever been. I can continue on with examples of how this third adventurer faction can redefine the past, present, and future of the World of Warcraft, but I'll save that for in case you want to challenge this concept in a comment below. Thank you so much for watching. Like this video, subscribe, or support the channel so I can keep giving you this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.